Happy 4th of July from the Trinity Broadcasting Network.
That's right. Happy 4th of July, everybody. It's that time of year again. And in the great unofficial calendar of American childhood, the 4th of July in the 1990s on the West Coast arrived not as a single day, but as a season. It began in late June, when folding tents selling fireworks appeared in grocery store parking lots as suddenly as mushrooms after rain. Their canvas roofs snapping in the afternoon breeze, and their racks of bright boxes glowing like forbidden treasure. Hand-painted signs promised safe and sane delights, though every kid suspected that the really exciting stuff required knowing someone with a cousin, a road trip, or a trunk that closed with suspicious care. Neighborhood chatter helped build the suspense, with adults comparing which county allowed what, which town had tightened rules after a bad fire season, and which friend of a friend had the good ones that were absolutely, definitely, probably not legal. The holiday itself hovered on the horizon like a carnival waiting to open, and for children, it produced a specific kind of anticipation that made time feel slow, bright, and slightly combustible. Days stretched with a syrupy drag, as if the calendar were stuck to the fridge by a magnet that refused to move, while the sun kept rising higher and the evenings grew warmer and longer. In the background, summer television played its own part, running patriotic commercials and reruns that made it seem like everyone in America was getting ready at the same time, even if the actual preparation in most homes amounted to buying extra hot dogs and a bag of ice. Morning on the 4th usually began with sunshine, already in full force, because July on the Pacific side of the country rarely bothered with subtlety. The air might be cool at first near the water, with a salty haze hanging over the street, but by mid-morning the brightness took over, and the day wore its heat like a badge. In coastal towns, the celebration might start with a parade that felt stitched together from equal parts civic pride and neighborhood improvisation, a moving scrapbook of the local community. Marching bands from nearby schools puffed through patriotic medleys, drum lines echoing off storefront windows and making the metal street signs shiver. Somewhere in the mix, there was always a slightly overwhelmed announcer on a crackly microphone, reading off sponsor names and attempting jokes that landed with cheerful awkwardness. Veterans rode in convertibles or perched on the back of pickup trucks, caps pulled low, waving to the curb with a calm that made them look like they had done this 1,000 times. Fire trucks crept along with sirens politely yelping, as if even the emergency vehicles were trying not to interrupt the holiday mood. Police officers on bikes rolled slowly beside the route, nodding at families they seemed to know by first name. Local politicians, real estate agents, and the owners of small businesses waved from decorated vehicles, tossing out flyers and miniature flags as if democracy ran on paper handouts and peppermint candy. Children pedaled bicycles decorated in red, white, and blue streamers that tangled in their spokes, the ribbons fluttering so wildly that the bikes seemed to be dragging little comets behind them. Some kids wore star-spangled sunglasses, others had temporary tattoos that glittered in the sun, and almost everyone carried some kind of snack with heroic determination. Candy arced through the air toward the curb, where small hands scrambled like prospectors, panning for sugar. The sound of it hitting the pavement was part of the ritual, the clatter of wrapped sweets, the squeal when a kid beat a sibling to a particularly prized piece, the parental reminder to pick up the good candy and leave the suspicious sticky one. Even towns that insisted they were too small for pageantry somehow produced a parade anyway, as if the 4th demanded it. If a town lacked floats, it would supply antique tractors. If it lacked tractors, it would round up classic cars. If it lacked classic cars, it would simply march everyone who owned a uniform and call it a tradition. The point was not Polish. The point was participation. In the 1990s, especially, there was still a sense that being physically present along the route mattered. That waving from the curb was part of the same civic muscle that later voted in elections and coached Little League. By midday, the celebration migrated to backyards, beaches, cul-de-sacs, and parks, as if the parade were merely the opening act and the real holiday lived wherever someone could unfold a lawn chair. On the West Coast especially, geography shaped the holiday's personality. In Southern California, grills smoked beside swimming pools, while surfboards leaned against fences like guests waiting their turn, and the scent of sunscreen mixed with charcoal until it became the smell of the day itself. In Northern California, families spread blankets across golden hillsides or waterfront lawns, opening coolers packed with soda cans, potato salad, and watermelon slices that dripped down wrists. In the Pacific Northwest, picnics unfolded under long daylight that refused to dim until nearly 10, with a gentler warmth that made it possible to eat outside without feeling like the sun was personally challenging you to survive. Some families packed up and headed for city parks, where softball games materialized without planning, where kids chased each other through sprinklers, and where someone inevitably brought a boombox that played a mix of classic rock and the pop hits of the moment. Others claimed a spot at the beach early and guarded it like prime real estate, watching the sand fill in around them until the shoreline looked like a patchwork quilt of umbrellas, coolers, and towels. Everywhere there was the same soundtrack. Portable radios humming in the background, distant laughter rising and falling in waves, and the metallic clack of tongs against barbecue grates. Adults moved with the purposeful rhythm of holiday hosting, turning meat, refilling drinks, and conducting the quiet diplomacy required to keep family gatherings smooth. Kids drifted between groups, eating something every 10 minutes because that was the unspoken rule of summer. If there was food within reach, it was meant to be sampled. Teenagers appeared in loose clusters at the edges of the scene, too old to play tag, but not yet ready to admit they wanted to sit with the adults, hovering near the cooler or the driveway with the posture of people pretending not to have plans. Someone's uncle always seemed to take charge of the grill with theatrical seriousness, flipping burgers as if auditioning for a cooking show that would not exist for another decade. Someone's aunt always showed up with a dessert that looked like it belonged in a magazine, a flag-themed cake, or a tray of fruit arranged with suspicious precision. And tucked into the background of these afternoons was the quiet countdown to evening, because no matter how pleasant the picnic was, everyone knew the day's climax had not yet arrived. Food was less a menu than a category of abundance, a rolling parade of familiar flavors that seemed to regenerate as soon as a platter emptied. Burgers and hot dogs dominated the grill like dependable headliners, their smoke mixing with the sweet, grassy heat of summer and the sharp scent of lighter fluid that no one ever admitted using. Corn on the cob appeared in buttery stacks, sometimes charred, sometimes boiled, always eaten with the kind of focused determination that left kernels lodged in teeth until the next morning. In Latino neighborhoods, carne asada turned the day into something aromatic and magnetic, the sizzle announcing itself down the block and drawing cousins, neighbors, and friends the way a song draws people to a dance floor. Paper plates sagged under the weight of potato salad, chips, and fruit that sweated in the sun. The desserts were their own patriotic theater. Sheet cakes frosted into flag patterns, sugar cookies dyed red and blue, gelatin cups that wobbled like fireworks in slow motion, and watermelon cut into triangles that dripped down wrists and elbows, leaving sticky evidence of joy on every doorknob and lawn chair. Adults lingered near coolers and folding chairs, orbiting the day at a slower speed. They talked about work and sports, about who had moved away and who had moved back, about the neighbor's new car, about the price of gas, about nothing at all, letting conversation expand and collapse without urgency. Someone kept counting how many burgers were left. Someone else swore they remembered a time when sparklers were longer, brighter, and somehow more dangerous, as if nostalgia required a slight exaggeration of combustion. In the background, a radio crackled through summer hits and classic rock, its volume rising whenever a favorite chorus arrived, and dipping again when the conversation grew interesting. Kids, freed from schedules and indoor rules, formed roaming packs that treated the neighborhood like an open map. They migrated from driveway to backyard to curb, stopping wherever the best snacks were, wherever the loudest laughter erupted, wherever a sprinkler offered a temporary ocean. They invented games with no clear beginning or end, reappearing only when summoned by name or by the smell of food. Someone inevitably brought a camcorder the size of a shoebox and documented everything with solemn dedication, filming with the earnestness of an archivist. The lens panned across relatives, pets, and the sky as though capturing a national documentary titled Backyard Freedom. The motion picture, complete with extended shots of someone trying to light a grill and a close-up of a dog looking mildly confused by the entire event. Fireworks, of course, were the true mythology of the day, the part that transformed an ordinary summer gathering into a ritual people talked about for weeks. Laws varied wildly across the West Coast, and that inconsistency only added intrigue. One town would allow a cheerful assortment of fountains and sparklers sold under reassuring banners like Safe and Sane, while the next town over treated anything louder than a snap pop as a civic emergency. Coastal communities worried about crowds and wind, inland suburbs worried about heat and dry brush, mountain towns worried about forests, and desert towns worried about everything because the desert itself seemed to wait for the smallest excuse to ignite. Yet rules had a way of bending around tradition, and tradition had a way of traveling in the trunk of a car. Certain families made annual pilgrimages across county or state lines, returning with paper sacks that crackled ominously and boxes carried with the careful tenderness usually reserved for fragile heirlooms. Other neighborhoods relied on a single unofficial supplier, the person who always seemed to know where the good stuff could be found, the one who spoke in confident hints and never explained too much. The vocabulary alone sounded like a comic book arsenal: bottle rockets, Roman candles, jumping jacks, smoke bombs, black cats, and the legendary devices whispered about like contraband treasure. Even the packaging had its own mystique, bright and slightly menacing, promising power in small cardboard cylinders. Children approached these objects with equal parts awe and recklessness, as if the Fourth had briefly suspended the usual laws of caution. Sparklers were the universal starting point, tiny handheld constellations that hissed and spat light, leaving faint trails and hotter-than-expected reminders on fingertips. Kids traced glowing circles in the dusk, wrote their names in the air, attempted hearts that came out lopsided, and discovered the hard way that sparks and bare ankles were not close friends. Someone always insisted they could hold a sparkler longer than anyone else, and someone else always proved that bravery had limits. Slightly older children graduated to ground spinners that skittered unpredictably across pavement, provoking shrieks and laughter as everyone hopped backward in uncoordinated unison. Smoke bombs felt like magic, turning sidewalks into haunted stages where kids disappeared into colored fog and re-emerged, coughing dramatically, delighted by their own theatrical suffering. Poppets snapped under shoes, turning ordinary walking into a tiny percussion performance. Even the simplest fireworks became props for experiments and dares, as if each one carried not only sparks, but a possibility of legend. Teenagers, meanwhile, developed a reputation for creativity that bordered on experimental science. They treated fireworks less like toys and more like material for invention, engineering launch angles, debating fuse lengths, and improvising equipment from whatever was available. Bottle rockets launched from tubes that had once belonged to a backyard project, from buried bottles angled with suspicious confidence, from improvised stands that looked sturdy until they absolutely were not. Roman candles were wielded like theatrical props, turned into mock duels that were funny only because everyone involved survived to laugh afterward. Stories formed instantly, polished and repeated by the end of the night. The rocket that shot sideways and chased someone across the lawn, the spinner that veered under a parked car, the dramatic sprint away from a fuse that suddenly seemed too short. Elaborate homemade combinations assembled from tape and optimism became neighborhood legends retold for years afterward, usually with the kind of selective editing that made the storyteller seem just slightly smarter than they had been at the time. Adults pretended not to notice until something sparked too close to a shrub, at which point a garden hose appeared with sudden authority, as if conjured by instinct. A parent would stand there, hose in hand, offering a look that contained both irritation and reluctant amusement. The message was clear. Enjoy yourselves, but don't turn the 4th into the 5th by accidentally burning down the block. As sunset approached, the entire day seemed to inhale, the way a room does just before someone blows out candles. The heat that had been sitting on shoulders all afternoon finally loosened its grip, and the air changed texture. On the coast, the ocean breeze arrived like a stagehand, pulling a curtain, sudden and cool, prompting people to dig through beach bags for sweatshirts or to swing light jackets over sunburned arms. In neighborhoods a few blocks inland, that same breeze carried the faint, salty edge of the Pacific and stirred wind chimes, patio umbrellas, and the frayed ends of red, white, and blue streamers that had been fluttering since morning. Someone always said, with a satisfied certainty, that it felt like fireworks weather, as if the sky needed just the right conditions to cooperate. Families began to reposition themselves for the evening's main event. Some climbed onto rooftops and truck beds for a better view, moving with the careful confidence of people who had done this every summer and knew which angles mattered. Teenagers hauled coolers, folding chairs, and blankets like migrating campers, aiming for the best patch of curb or the best rise in a grassy field. In coastal cities, crowds drifted toward boardwalks and beaches, carrying their folding chairs like pilgrims bearing offerings. And there was something almost ceremonial about the slow shuffle toward the water. Strollers rolled over cracked sidewalks, wagons full of snacks rattled behind parents. Dogs trotted along, blissfully unaware that the next few hours would test their patience and everyone's hearing. In inland suburbs, families gathered at school fields or lakesides where official displays would soon begin. And these places took on the feeling of temporary towns. People staked out their territory with blankets and plastic tarps, forming neat little rectangles of claimed space. Children ran short, looping routes between groups, darting toward the concession stand and back, playing improvised tag games that took advantage of the gathering crowd. The smell of sunscreen mixed with the lingering smoke of barbecue, and the first mosquitoes of the evening began their quiet campaign. Radios were tuned to local stations that promised synchronized music, their volume adjusted with endless debate, loud enough to hear, not so loud that it would bother strangers who are already clearly prepared to behave like neighbors for the night. Vendors did brisk business in the twilight. Cotton candy appeared in pastel clouds that seemed absurdly delicate against the coming thunder of fireworks. There were pretzels, snow cones, the occasional paper tray of nachos that never survived the walk back to the blanket. Glow necklaces and bracelets sold especially well, and once they began to snap and shine, children transformed into moving constellations of neon. A kid in a blinking red necklace became a tiny lighthouse. A child with a blue glow stick waved it like a conductor's baton. The crowd gradually filled with these bright, bobbing lights, turning the field into a low, twinkling galaxy beneath the darker one overhead. When darkness finally settled, the sky became a stage, and it felt as if everyone was suddenly speaking in whispers, even when they weren't. The final scraps of daylight faded behind hills or buildings, and the horizon turned a deep, bruised blue. A few false starts were common, the distant thump of a test shot, the crowd reacting as if it were the first burst, then realizing it was only a teaser and laughing at itself. Children bounced in place with anticipation, the way they did before opening presents, while adults checked watches they didn't really need, because the moment always announced itself with sound. Professional shows erupted first, each explosion blooming into color and thunder that echoed off hills or rolled across water. The first big burst often felt like an official permission slip for joy. A collective gasp rose up, followed by applause that seemed to surprise the people making it, as if clapping at the sky might influence its performance. Then came the familiar rhythm, crack, bloom, rumble, and a few beats of hush, while everyone looked up, waiting for the next one. Children narrated the shapes as if they were reading clouds. Adults made small exclamations that sounded like they had forgotten for most of the year how easily something could still delight them. On the West Coast, reflections doubled the spectacle, as if nature insisted on giving audiences 2 shows for the price of 1. Fireworks over the Pacific scattered themselves across waves, the colors breaking and reforming in the water like liquid confetti. Shows above bays and lakes painted mirrored galaxies below, and people who had positioned themselves just right could watch both the sky and its shimmering twin at once. The smell of gunpowder drifted through the air, sharp and metallic, clinging to clothes and hair like a souvenir no one had to buy. It settled into the folds of jackets and the fabric of blankets, a scent that would resurface later in the laundry basket and briefly transport everyone back to that night. After the grand displays ended, the smaller ones resumed, and in a way, these were the true signature of the era, the ragged encore performed by whoever had enough sparklers left and enough confidence to light them. Neighborhoods flickered with leftover fireworks and last-chance rockets, the street itself becoming a patchwork stage. You could tell where the action was by sound alone. A sharp pop down the block, a whistle that rose and ended with a muted crack, a burst of laughter followed by shouted instructions that were either helpful or wildly late. Porch lights glowed. Garage doors stood open as if for ventilation or as if the houses themselves wanted to watch. Someone always had one final surprise saved for a dramatic finish, and someone else always insisted it was definitely safe, an assurance delivered with the kind of certainty that rarely survives contact with reality. A parent with a garden hose took up a casual position of authority, pretending it was purely for cleanup. An uncle, a neighbor, or a friend's older brother would attempt to arrange a mini show in the driveway, lining up fountains and spinners, as if choreographing them. The fuse would be lit, and everyone would take 1 or 2 steps back, then 3 or 4 more when the first sparks behaved unpredictably. The night was full of these tiny dramas, all of them ending in smoke and delighted overreaction. Children stayed up later than usual, buoyed by sugar and excitement, their faces smudged with watermelon juice or cotton candy, their hair smelling faintly of smoke. They argued about which firework was the best. Which one was the loudest? Which one looked like a palm tree? Which one looked like a chrysanthemum? Which one totally made a smiley face, even if it obviously did not? Adults lingered in folding chairs discussing how quickly the year seemed to pass, speaking with a special kind of nostalgia that could appear even while the event was still happening. Someone always commented on how the kids were getting so big, how it felt like yesterday they were toddlers, and how it would be different next year, even though next year always seemed impossible to imagine. It was not uncommon for music to start again, or for someone to produce a guitar, or for a group to drift toward a late showing of whatever summer blockbuster had captured imaginations that year. In the 1990s, movies had a habit of becoming seasonal rituals without anyone declaring them so. Families might adopt a tradition of watching a baseball movie that featured fireworks as if the film itself were an extension of the holiday. Others gravitated toward big action spectacles that felt suitably explosive for the occasion, laughing at familiar scenes and quoting favorite lines the way people quoted patriotic slogans. Someone would inevitably say a catchphrase in a mock-heroic voice, and even those who rolled their eyes would smile, because the point was never originality. The point was repetition, the comfort of doing the same thing again and recognizing oneself inside it. What made these celebrations distinctly 1990s was not only the fireworks or the food, but the texture of the social world around them. Without smartphones, people did not document every spark. They experienced it first and remembered it later. Photos existed, but they were fewer, and the blurry ones were not deleted in disgust, but kept anyway, because they proved someone was there. Conversations stretched without interruption. Plans were made by word of mouth, with directions that sounded vague, but were understood perfectly. Meet by the big tree, we'll be near the snack stand. Look for the blue cooler, we're on the side closer to the water. If someone wanted to find their friends, they walked down the street and looked for the loudest yard or the brightest cluster of glow necklaces. Children traveled in little packs, returning occasionally to report to parents like explorers checking in at base camp. Community felt less like an abstract idea and more like a visible gathering of lawn chairs under porch lights. For a few hours, neighborhoods behaved like small towns even in large cities. People who never spoke the rest of the year exchanged snacks, offered sunscreen, shared matches, lent bottle openers, and watched each other's kids as if it were obvious to do so. It was not necessarily perfect or safe or polite, but it was undeniably social in a way that felt natural to the decade. Even the mild chaos had a sort of choreography, as if everyone understood the rules without writing them down. By the time the last ember faded and families drifted home, the night carried a faint ringing silence. The noise did not disappear so much as it receded, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost physical, like a blanket being pulled over the neighborhood. Streets were speckled with cardboard tubes, burned sticks, and bits of red paper confetti that clung to curbs and gutters. The air still smelled faintly of sulfur, and sometimes the breeze would carry a last stray crack from a distant block, a final stubborn punctuation mark on the evening. Children fell asleep still smelling faintly of smoke, their skin warm from the day and their heads full of color. Some nodded off in the back seat before the car even left the parking lot, their glow necklaces dimming against their t-shirts. Others stayed awake just long enough to ask if they could do it again tomorrow, as if the holiday were a ride that could simply be repeated. Adults tiptoed through bedtime routines with the soft fatigue of people who had spent the day outside, in crowds, and in the particular emotional brightness that comes from tradition. And the next morning, many kids woke early to ride bicycles through the neighborhood, searching for unspent treasures, proof that the celebration had truly happened. The scavenging had its own logic and its own thrill. A dud firecracker, like a lost coin, a stray parachute that had drifted into a tree, a perfectly intact sparkler that felt like a second chance. Even in places where everything was supposedly cleaned up, the day after always held remnants, small artifacts of noise and lights. In memory, those West Coast 4th glow with the same colors as the fireworks themselves. Bright, fleeting, a little chaotic, and impossibly vivid. The decade seems, in retrospect, to have celebrated with an almost cheerful disregard for sleekness or efficiency. It preferred gatherings over schedules, shared spectacle over private distraction, and the simple, tangible astonishment of looking up together. If it was going to celebrate independence, it might as well do so with as much light and noise as the sky could hold, and with enough lingering smoke and laughter to prove that the night had been real.